Okay, so we're probably gonna get started. There's enough people. So, hello everyone. As you all know, I'm Eunice and I'm your president, and I would like to thank you all for joining us this Saturday afternoon. Well, today's Zoom will be slightly different compared to those we had in the past, as we announced. It'll be more of an open discussion moderated by our three board members and our three panelists speaking about the BLM movement. So please turn on your cameras and your mics if you're comfortable and participate in our discussion and state your opinions. Please stay open-minded. But if you are here just for insight, that is perfectly fine as well. However, Pri, our secretary, demands that you are open-minded and respect others and their opinions. So I will hand it off to Pri to introduce our wonderful speakers for the day.
Hello. So as Eunice mentioned, I am Pri and I am the secretary of Heads Up Buttercup. And this is an open discussion, so please feel free to share your opinions and experiences, but I do demand that you are respectful to other people. And these are our wonderful guest speakers, Miss Aisha Rand, Miss Jude Scott, and Miss Astrid Cota. So I'm gonna let you ladies introduce yourself.
All right.
Go.
All right. Okay. I'm Aisha Rand. I'm a visual designer, illustrator, and animator. I felt like, as of today's social climate and political climate, I needed to speak up and really just use my voice and utilize my voice and just really tell people, inform others, Black people, non-Black people, white people about what's going on and how to help, how to be a better person, how to be a better ally. Yeah.
You want to go ahead, Jude?
Okay. Well, I'm Jude. I am a behavior interventionist. That's what I do for work, and I'm a student at Cal State Long Beach. And I agree. I think this is a really important conversation to have, not only right now while it's getting all of this like hype on the internet and in the media, but for always. Like, I think that this was a really good opportunity for people to learn something that they hadn't learned, because I'm of the very strong opinion that when you know better, you do better. And if you don't know better, you can't do any better. So I think this is really cool. Super excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Astrid Cota. I am an activist and organizer with the People's City Council and with Sunrise Movement LA. And I'm a student at Cal State LA, and my major is political science. I switched, did a complete flip. I was initially a nursing major, and now I'm political science with a minor in sociology. So yeah, and I also think it's very important to destigmatize these type of conversations, and yeah, really bring it home and like try to find the ways that we can all relate and work on it like ourselves, and it's just basically like spread awareness. I love to spread awareness. So I'm here for and support.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for introducing yourselves. So I'm just gonna go ahead and start with the first question. So to everyone, this is open. What is your experience with racism? Like whether it's coming from your parents or whether it's your friend or your school, like where have you seen racism? What's your personal experience with it?
I'll start first. I've seen racism literally since I was a child. I have experienced racism even as a child, like as I mentioned before in the previous discussion, like, being subjected to racism as a kid, it was really confusing because I couldn't really understand the concept of people not liking me because of my skin color. Like it would literally confuse me why, Latino or white or Asian people wouldn't necessarily respect me or want to befriend me because I was Black, because the color of my skin was brown, because I had nappier, coarser hair. And over time there were certain ideas embedded that had me feeling some type of way, like, especially as a Black woman, just sometimes growing up as a Black girl, you grow up not liking certain traits about yourself. It could be your nose or your lips, your hair. For a long time, I didn't really like getting darker. I didn't like my lips. I thought I was like weird looking. And then also, you know, within the Black community, there's a lot of resentment towards darker skinned women, period.
Colorism.
Yeah, colorism. It's a really terrible, disgusting thing that's been going on since slavery. And it definitely influenced my preferences growing up. I didn't like Black boys for a very long time because they didn't respect Black girls. They used to call us cockroaches, and they were only really into either lighter skinned girls or girls that were racially ambiguous or just not Black at all. And that was something that kind of, I guess, subconsciously hurt my feelings. It, as a defense mechanism for me, the type of person I am, I would just be like, you know, F you, I'll just date anybody else that's not Black if that's how you guys feel. But growing up, I realized how much of a problem it is and how it's kind of an epidemic within Black people, and how it really, it's divisive, and it really divides us as a people and keeps us from being united. And there's so much resentment, you know, towards light-skinned people or towards darker-skinned people. It's just, I feel like now, because we're in the age of being more socially aware, it's kind of, we're having these conversations of unlearning and really, you know, like debunking why Black men have these certain, you know, preferences. Or even, you know, again, as I was discussing earlier, like why do certain other cultures or other ethnic people have these preferences, why they don't like Black people, why they don't want to date Black people. So yeah, that's just one little part of race based. Not all, but just one.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, with my experience with racism is I grew up with my parents like telling me to walk on the other side of the road if I saw like a Black person, or just like avoiding communities in general just because the population of Black people was significantly more than any other race. So I grew up thinking that Black people were dangerous. And I'll admit it took me a while to understand that, one, that was racist, and two, that it's not true. And I feel like a lot of kids in the city, or a lot of kids that are as privileged as I am, deal with the same kind of, or are taught the same things.
I do agree with that point. I have experience with like dealing with that like family mentality where you're expected to just not like people of a certain race, because like when I was younger, I used to go to my cousins a lot, and we would have dinner there, and my cousin had a friend who was Black, and when we went to, I noticed like he always came to dinner when it was like a meet, or like families, like when we gathered like without my grandparents, but when my grandparents were there, like he wasn't allowed to be there. His friend wasn't allowed to be there. And I was really young at the time. I was like maybe 7, and I couldn't quite understand why this was happening, but my parents were like, you know, it's just the way it is. Like there's nothing we can do about it. And I've been raised really well to know that that is not the right response. That is not correct. Like, but that's just my experience. And I feel like it's because people who are racist usually are either uneducated or they are educated the wrong way. Yeah, and this really has a toll on, like, just like how most kids, they either think about going into a profession like their parents, or they actually go into it. It's the same concept. Like the way you're raised often depicts the way that you're going to think in the future, and it has a major impact on your actions in the future towards other people.
Yeah, it's definitely generational. I think that's a really interesting point that you made, Nikki. Because, you know, where do you learn anything first? From your parents. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, like the people that tell you how to read, how to use a bathroom, how to feed yourself, and it's kind of it's part of growing up that you have to unlearn certain things so that you can learn how things work better for you that obviously don't align with your parents. But racism is reinforced not only by your parents, but by like the media, by commercials, by the people in your school, everybody, and it comes from all different directions. So it takes a lot of like reminders. It takes a lot of like dedicated restructuring of your thoughts. And it's true, like even by where you go to work, like how far in your parents' footsteps do you feel like you want to travel? And so I think I just want to commend all of you guys for being willing to seek out information so that you can have the tools to unlearn that kind of behavior and those kinds of prejudices, because every single person has them. I have them, Aisha had them about like her own self. And do you know like how painful that is for a Black person to deal with every single day? It's uncomfortable. It's hard to rewrite that. But it's all of our responsibility, and it's in every single culture. So I think that's something that you really need to remember, is that it's a learned behavior. It's not something you're born with, and anything that's learned can be unlearned. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that opinion for like the learning thing, but also like I feel like it also reflects on our government's ability to like help lead like to make sure that this stops, because if there's racism going on and you have the president not even really caring that much, like I don't really have a political opinion. I'm like in the middle, but it does tend to be a bit ridiculous when you have a president who's not willing to help people. So I don't know if it's either the more majority of like the person who is racist, if it's their fault, or if it's the government's fault for not like enforcing it better.
Yeah, I think I kind of want to like touch on Nikki and David's, like what you both said. First, Nikki, how you mentioned, I totally resonated like with your experience with your grandparents. For me, it was like a different experience. It's not that like my family openly shamed Black people, but except for this one time, I remember I was like really obsessed with Travis Scott in high school, and like I've always just like grown kind of separate and like been more isolated like growing up from my family. Not like intentionally, it's just like I'm kind of like to myself, I guess. Anyways, but so I never really like paid attention to like the way that they are about like racial issues. But I just remember this one time I was sitting at the dining table at my grandparents' house, and my Nina was there, and so was my Nana. And obviously my Nana, she's an old woman, she's not on social media, but my Nina was like, oh, you know, Astrid likes to go to like these, like, she said like the N-word, she's like these type of shows. And I was just like sitting there like, what? Like telling my grandma like, oh my god, like look at what she's doing. And I was just like, what? Like, well, mind you, my Nana, she has like fair skin, and my Nina is basically white passing. She had like red hair growing up, but we have Mexican blood. And my Nana like responded in such a negative way. She just made like this face, like she just scrunched her face and she just like looked away. And I was like, Nana, I was like, what? Like, what, like, what is this? And she was just like, ugh, like, basically she was in disgust. And I was like, I had no idea that you were like this. And it was just so disappointing to learn that my Nana had that side of her. I don't really share this openly. I don't think I've ever actually shared it, but it just really like, I don't know. It was really hard to like be in that moment. And I was like younger then, and I didn't, it's kind of hard to like call out people in your family, because like, at least in my household, it's like, oh, if we pay the bills, if this is our house, then you're under our rules, and you have to obey us no matter what. Like, you have no rights basically. Like, we own you. And so I just like didn't say anything, because like my family's quick to just like be aggressive and like verbal. But anyways, so yeah, it really is like a thing that is like it's like a visceral thing that happens like in our families, where this like this perspective is just passed down. I'm glad it wasn't like passed down to me. Anyways, my mom never really like made racist comments or anything like that. Neither did my dad. But yeah, it's just, that was just something I guess I wanted to share. Like, I resonate with that. And also to David, like, I feel like it's not, I kind of want to, I don't want to like tell you that you're wrong, but I want to say that it's not that the president like doesn't do anything about it. He actually is like such a great example of the problem and like how what's the word, how evident, I can't that's not the word, that's not the word I want to use, but like his racism, like he literally ran his campaign on racism and attacking Latinos repeatedly, like, and Black people, like calling immigrants rapists and like murderous, and you know, saying that
And
we
from
bring
like
blood.
shithole countries.
Yes, and like that just felt so personal to me because he was just attacking like what I look like, and you know, my family members, and that's just insane. It's like he is such a I feel like he's kind of like this evil force that just like kind of he was like a call out to like the racist people in our country to be like, it's okay to be hateful, let's do it, and we're gonna make these people's lives even more miserable altogether. You know, it's kind of like literally just the opposite of like what we're doing here. He just instills hate on everyone and encourages it so blatantly. So yeah, I just want to make it clear that he is like a huge part of the problem
Yeah,
in today's society.
I also want to chime in too. Like, I think right now you should definitely do more research on the political system and on Donald Trump, just because, especially, he has a record history of being racist, of being xenophobic, of being misogynist. And, you know, his actions are like, they're completely blatantly racist. Like, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Juneteenth is the day that Black people were emancipated, that we were given freedom in the late or mid 1800s. And it's something that we celebrate, not necessarily as largely as like the 4th of July, but now in this year, Black people are planning to do that because of everything that's happened. And, you know, even some companies are giving, paid days off. And Donald Trump, he wants to hold a whole rally on that day specifically.
He said it would be
Yeah, especially against, you know, the Black Lives Matter protests. He calls Black Lives Matter Antifa, and he calls it racist. And if you're not aware of what Antifa is, it means to be anti-fascist. And if you don't know what fascist is, please just you know what a Nazi is. So that's yeah. So definitely please do more research on the government and on Trump and his motives. Because he's definitely, if any white person is complacent, it's not him. He's doing his power to, you know,
perpetuate
racism to the T.
Mm-hmm.
Adding on to what Aisha said, you know how he uses Twitter a lot for a lot of his opinions. So a while back, when people were protesting against quarantine, he said to just reason with them and that they're reasonable people. And these were like mostly white people who were complaining about not being able to get a haircut or not being able
guns, girl, with guns.
Yeah. And then just fast forward a few weeks later, and we have the BLM movement fighting for their lives and their safety, and he calls these people thugs. Like, if that's not, and they're not even armed. And
he called National Guard on us. He called
Mm-hmm.
National Guard.
Exactly. Like, if that doesn't show what's racist, then I don't.
And like, and also like you forgot to mention that like 2-3 weeks after those protests happened by like the right wing people protesting for haircuts. Yeah, they right away, like all these companies and states started like talking about, oh, we're making plans to reopen things slowly but surely, we're gonna do it, like it's happening. And it, you know, like they got what they wanted like that. And we protest just for like our rights and for the rights of to be alive for Black people, because Black Lives Matter, and they're upset that we're like unifying together. And I also wanted to mention how like the government the US government like wasn't really made to serve like people of color and Black people. It was made to like uphold, it was basically like just made to uphold white supremacy and keep the power in white hands. And it's never been, the intention was never like to like give power to people of color and Black people. It's always been to oppress them, like literally. And then like that's when we can get into the whole conversation about like the criminal justice system and how like the just it's hard to fathom the disproportionate like amounts of Black people versus white people in prison, and how like it's like basically criminalize your skin color. They criminalize very insignificant like actions and make it seem like a threat to society, and like literally like their politics like literally run on these ideas that Black people and people of color are criminals and that they need to be punished. It's like I'm just gonna stop there, but
It's exhausting.
yeah,
Exhausting is a good word for it.
So Aisha, I have like a question. So what do you think that our generation can do to like try to get rid of racism? Because obviously if the government's not going to help out, like we have to be able to do something, and treating them equally. Like I have a Black friend and we're pretty close, but obviously that's not doing anything if Black Lives Matter is such a huge movement, if there's still so much inequality. So what do you think that we can possibly do at our age to help make racial equality a thing?
Well, my name's Aisha, by the way.
Aisha?
Yeah, Aisha. But
Okay.
I think for you, especially as an ally, you need to listen to Black people. Do your research. You know, if a Black person is telling you about the injustices, about how hard it is for even just them to really go within the system and change the system, I think you should do your part, because even if you are a person of color, you still have more privilege than me, period. And I think that's something you can use, you can utilize. I think also, again, really research on government, vote. I know a lot of people right now, they're like incredibly hopeless, especially with the new campaign going on, the 2020 campaign. But the best thing you can do is do your research on your US official, your US reps, your senators, your mayors, because those are the people, your DAs, because those are the people that are going to go into power. These are the people that are making and passing these laws. These are the people that are the gatekeepers of politics. And they are the ones that say what's what. You need to inform others, and you need to do the work and hold accountability for yourself. You need to call out people that are blatantly racist or have microaggressions. You know, protect Black people. You got to protect them like they're your own, like they're your family. Because it, you know, I don't know if you're very aware, but that's what a lot of Black people do for other people of color. But we don't get that reciprocated a lot of the time.
Another thing that I think is really important, it's easy to communicate like your concerns and your questions to all kinds of like appropriate places. Like I learned all kinds of things, of course, like double check, but like from my social media and the people in my life, like, and you can ask, like say, hey, I heard somebody say this thing, it sounded pretty weird to me. Would you have wanted me to step up? And then when it happens again to somebody else, and then step up and say it. And it's important, like Asia was saying, be vocal about microaggressions, because it adds up and it's constant. Like the little things really make a huge difference. Like when I was in elementary school and I went to a really like predominantly white school, and people would pull my hair because like, why not? And little things like that to Black children, to Black teenagers means a lot. There's also a billion petitions that need to be signed and shared. You know, I found this one link. I had a bunch of petitions that hadn't met all of their goals, and to say their names and like to recognize that there are people who are dying and received no justice, like hundreds, thousands of people, human beings just like myself and all of you, who never got the opportunity to get to their next birthday. Like how profoundly sad that is, and that there's a system to protect that action to make sure it never has to end. I think that it's really important for you to come up with some good ideas to support your community that would like solve these problems, because we're smart people, and I think that the government, especially our local government, really does rely on us being dumb and complacent. And it's not just the responsibility of one person to solve the problem. Like, there's not just one Martin Luther King, one Malcolm X. There's a billion people who had to stand behind that to make anything happen. And there's nothing holding you from being that person to support people who are coming with those ideas, and for you to provide those kinds of ideas. Like, and your friends of color will know, like your Black friends will know, and just to provide them an open ear to listen and to see the kind of things. It's like, oh God, I never realized that was a problem, and it was a really big problem. Like, I'm a Black person. I had a really good conversation with my friend, and she had to check me for not understanding exactly how colorism worked. That's a really big deal, and you have to be open to being like, oh, okay, I was wrong. Like, oh, that's something I didn't know. And then use that information for the rest of your life to do better. And there's a billion books to read. You can support Black-owned business. You can support Black artists. Asia Rand. And just communicate with each other. Hold your political officials accountable, and like do the little things that you do every day, because every single personal action is political. Every single one. Deciding to show up for this was a political action. And there's a billion of these kinds of things that you can be a part of. This was really cool. Really cool. There's hundreds of people trying to make things like this happen, and you can be part of making that happen. So I know that it's really discouraging sometimes to see how big this 400-year problem is, this massive, huge, like generational plague, and the same tiny actions that people do to perpetuate it can be flipped on its head to make something better. And I hope that that's something that you remember all the time. Like, you have whatever it would take to make it smaller, if that makes sense.
Two things. I was just gonna ask, is it possible for you to send like the links of where we can donate or petitions in the chat box so I can like write them down for resources for later? And then also, I've heard that there are some like fake petitions or fake donating websites where they just take the money and use it for their own personal use, or literally possibly even against the Black Lives Movement. So how do you differentiate between a reliable petition versus a fake one?
Well, one of the things that I like to do is just to like look a little bit further. Like, there was that one where it was like every share is like 10 cents towards the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay, how are you going to get that to the Black Lives Matter movement? Like, what exactly are you donating to? Or like people, monsters who are doing things like that for memorial services, which is a place that I like to donate. And look at who posted it. Like, look at their relationship to the person, their bio, the people who have been donating to the same thing, because people are evil and nasty and yucky, and they will jump on whatever they can possibly imagine. But there's ways, just like look a little bit further, and also see how long certain petitions have been present. You could see how long and like what things are being shared too, because a lot of people get bamboozled that way. And if you see something that's wrong like that and you see someone else post about it and be like, hey, this is actually a huge scam, save your money, delete this, and tell everyone else that you see having questions about it, or post it on your own Instagram. Like, when people were posting the black square,
I was about to say that.
Yeah, and so when I do, but like when I found out about that, every single one that I would see, I would go down the Black Lives Matter hashtag and I would just copy and paste the same thing. Like, hey, this is really like, this is stopping a lot of people from learning things. Strangers, like, copy and paste. It took me like 10 minutes to get through at least 50. And geez, maybe more, because I only did it for like 10 minutes. But little things like that, like you going further and then explaining it to someone else and sharing something, or redirecting. So like, if you find something that's fake, be like, hey, this is fake, but here's a real one if you want to participate in that way. And so, because sometimes people aren't going to look as hard as you will. Sometimes people won't be as invested as you would be. But again, my tiny 10 minutes went really far, and I'm just a person. Like, I'm just a person with 10 minutes on my hands, just like you. And it's really easy to educate people that way. And it's kind of nerve-wracking to have to explain things like that, especially to strangers, but it's always worthwhile.
Yeah, I also want to add Shaun King. He is not our white savior. He is a scam artist.
Mm-hmm.
There's been so many articles on him about how he doesn't follow through with a lot of the organizations, as well as the Black Lives Matter organization. There's like an actual organization of Black Lives Matter, like the co-founders, they work with Shaun King, and they do the same thing. You know, people donate to them, but as if you go on their website, there's no actual sites or no actual, like, you know, places where the donations go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that you should also look into. I know that a lot of people revere and Shaun King's efforts to bring, you know, a lot of these injustices to light, but that's pretty much all he does. Everything else, he just gets $1 from, and he doesn't put anything into, you know, actually helping Black people. He's really more so exploitative. There's articles about him, you know. Some say that maybe he does have good intentions, but he just doesn't really follow through with these organizations. But regardless, it's exploitative, especially when he keeps doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's literally the textbook version of insanity. Like, it's the textbook, you know, it's just, it's ridiculous. And I've had conversations with white people, and they get really, like, kind of confused, and they kind of, like, don't really know where else to go or who to go to about trying to find information, or, you know, going, like, you know, just it's something that is really confusing to a lot of people. But look it up. Just do your research. Do your research about some of these organizations, or even change.org. They were just blown up about, you know, basically the whole George Floyd, his memorial, and all the money being donated to him, as well as the petitions. Basically, change.org, they're pocketing pretty much almost all that money that people have sent in.
Mm-hmm.
So please just note that. Hello.
So I really just want to talk about where the origin of the modern racism, known as systemic racism, come from. It comes from this one thought called implicit racism, which can be traced back all the way to the times of slavery, when African people were forced to be brought to America and to forced labor. Even when they were freed by the Emancipation Act, they were still stuck in the bottom of the society. They cannot move up because of the Jim Crow laws and the segregation that followed. So what happens is that people gradually develop this mindset called implicit racism that apply to a lot of modern situations that we every day. So a lot of, like, situation we encounter every day today is that when a colored person and a white person graduate from the same school with the same GPA, with this exact same resume, the more white sounding name will often attract more jobs and opportunities, while the more, I guess, exotic sounding name will probably attract less opportunities. This is because of the implicit racism rooted in the people's mindsets that trace back to all the way decades ago, even millennia ago, to the mindset that Black people are in the bottom of the society. They're uneducated, they're violent, they're poor, which is why the cycle of impoverishment continues, because of implicit racism.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a cycle. I think another thing to note is that it's hundreds of years ago, like hundreds of years ago. How crazy to have to reteach this to people, or to think like, okay, someone's great 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 grandfather decided to take this person from their country, and then they taught all of their grandchildren and onward. And even after slavery, they weren't, like, Black people aren't given the same resources. They're not given the same opportunities for work. And think about it. Check it out. Okay, so you find out that slavery is outlawed. Cool. At the same time, you know that you do not have the education and that it's crazy unlikely that you'll be hired as a Black person to work in any profession that would give you enough money to be able to be educated. Remember how Black people as slaves were, not even just as slaves, but Black people were murdered for knowing how to read. And then think about how long someone would have to work to make enough money for their child to be educated, to go to college, to finish college. How are you going to do that when you still need this child to be working to feed yourself? Like, it goes on like that. And then people assume that, like, Black people are just going to end up in prison anyways. I don't know if you guys know about the school to prison pipeline, but how Black children are, gosh, I think it was 8 times more likely. Black boys were 8 times more likely than white boys to be part of the same kind of, I don't know, naughtiness problem, same kind of like delinquent action. And one would go to juvie and the other gets like detention or suspension. Do you know how horrible it is to be like a 13-year-old kid to go to juvie? How are you going to finish high school spending however much time in juvie? That'll set people back too. It goes on and on and on like that, and it becomes a cycle. And it's something that a lot of people don't recognize. I think it's really important that you mention that those implicit biases that, like, Black people aren't supposed to know how to read. Black people aren't supposed to have families with money. Black people aren't supposed to be able to go to college. Black people aren't supposed to do all kinds of things. And when you see that happening, it becomes a stereotype that you carry forever. And it takes a lot of work to rewrite that. And a lot of people aren't willing to do the work, which is how it gets perpetuated this way. So, like, I work in Orange County. I go to kids' houses, and I work with kids with autism. So I'm there, and I'm there for a while because we do play-based therapy. And this one time I was leaving, it was a particularly really hard session, and I wanted to call my mom. So I get out of their neighborhood in Orange County. It's a pretty affluent place. And I get down the street in my little car because I'm poor, and I'm on the phone with my mom. And this other car comes down the street, and they see this little Black girl on the phone in their neighborhood doing something sketchy, obviously, at 6 o'clock at night. So they stay there. They watch me for a little while. Don't really go anywhere. A couple minutes later, I see somebody else in a truck come and follow right behind that person to go and, like, check me out, make sure I'm doing okay, because they're concerned. So they pull up next to me, stare at me for a long time, leave, and then come back. And when they come back, I have to leave. It's little things like that that you couldn't possibly imagine that I was there to do something good. That you couldn't possibly imagine that me and my little, like, 2004 Nissan Sentra had any business being in a place where you and your family reside. And that implicit bias it becomes detrimental. It becomes dangerous to a lot of people. And luckily, they were, for all I can assume, just curious. But anyways, I had to get out of there because you don't know. That's how people get shot. People like myself get hunted all the time for being in places they shouldn't be or places they didn't know that we would be. And that implicit bias is something that you should recognize yourself. It's something that you should talk about all the time. And to remind yourself, like, oh, okay, no, there's definitely Black professionals sometimes. Like, there's definitely Black people that have money. There's definitely Black dentists. And, you know, to have to teach yourself after being taught so many years that Black people can read, Black people can do things. I'm really glad that you mentioned that implicit bias.
I also want to build on, like, how implicit bias is also in the justice system as well. You can tell there's statistics that say that white juries are more able to, like, give max sentences to Black suspects, and you can also see it throughout history. You can see how crack cocaine and powder cocaine laws, the disparity between them. led to, you know, Black people getting more incarcerated and persecuted for that, and it was completely unfair amount until the Fair Sentencing Act of like 2010 or something. And also, I think the 1994 crime bill also, it just allowed so much injustice to happen when it increased the prison industrial system. It gave more money to police departments. It allowed for just, I guess, the authority over police officers to use more force and to be over militarized at the same time. That just amplified the problem, especially when it led to more deaths in the United States, just innocent people, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ryan.
Oh, sorry.
Uh,
No, that's all I had to say.
No, I was just saying thank you.
Oh, okay. I kind of wanted to mention, I'm sorry, like we're like on this topic for so long, but I also wanted to mention like racism in like the media, and specifically I mean like film and like television. Like I feel like something that you can do is just like be aware of like what it looks like, and like who's playing what roles, and like just things like that. Or like I don't know, like I've become so political. I think I've always been like very political, but I never realized like that I have so much like awareness, I guess, to like actually put it into like use. I didn't put like all my politicalness into use until like December. But like for a while, like 2 years now, I've been like really conscious of what like I said, like characters and things like that in movies. And I've become so picky because I just get annoyed, like genuinely annoyed that there are like so many white actors in like everything. And it makes me, or like not even just like racism, but also like sexism. Like there's so many more male actors, or you know, it's just like the workforce is like same thing in like what, I don't know what to call it, like the film,
Yeah,
Media, film industry.
yeah. And like I get like I don't even watch TV that much anymore, or like movies, because I'm just like so picky, because I get so frustrated like seeing all these like white people, and like it's just about like white lives, and there's just no representation. And like even my boyfriend, like I'll be watching something with my boyfriend, and I'll just be like, there are no women in the frame right now, like it's so annoying. And he gets
The
annoyed.
Bechdel test. Do you ever do the Bechdel test?
I don't know what that's called, but probably.
Oh, okay. So it's this test. So like when you're watching a movie, and it's just like, okay, is there a woman in here that has that doesn't have a romantic counterpart? Are there, like, I don't know, there's like a certain ratio of like men characters to like female characters, any people of color that you're seeing in the movie. It's so crazy to think about how little representation there is in the media.
Yeah.
And I would really quick fast, because I do this, I'm sorry. Do you know how powerful it is to see different people of color in little stupid like romantic comedy movies? Like I don't know if you guys ever saw The Lovebirds. It's on Netflix. So cool, and I love it so much because it gives people of color an opportunity to be part of a movie that isn't just about being poor, that isn't just about being slaves, and it's not just about having a white savior. Living for all of it. Also, there's this other show, it's on Netflix, called Never Have I Ever.
Yes.
I love it. I love it so much. It's such a good opportunity for people to be like, oh yeah, people can also just go to high school and have like this dumb little issue with their friends or their boyfriends. Like it's relatable. And one of the reasons that people are just like so, I don't know, in love with white stories is because it makes it seem more relatable, but it's not. It's still relatable, even though you can like still celebrate you can still celebrate stuff, and you don't have to just have a token. Like they can have a whole family and like a whole backstory that people don't consider, and how much it means to people to have a story like Never Have I Ever, or to have a show like Insecure, or to watch Crazy Rich Asians or Fresh Off the Boat. Like that's huge. And if we support things like that, do you know how far that can go? There's this other show called Hentified on Netflix.
I love Hentified.
and how much it means to you to see a person on television that looks like you, that has the same history, same culture, same language, same holidays, and for it to just be, it doesn't have to be a message. It can just be something that makes you laugh, like that you have
and it's not trauma porn. It's not trauma porn. Like,
yes, that's a good word.
As a Black person, it almost like makes me not want to watch the film when it's a Black film and it's about slavery, or it's about just something that a Black woman has gone through that's traumatic.
Suffering. She suffers. She suffers in the beginning. She suffers in the end. She suffers all her life. And
suffer. Like, especially when you talk about Insecure, that's one of my favorite shows, because I've never like seen a Black show in which people are like, Aisha, like, she reminds me of you. A lot of people be like, Issa reminds me of Aisha, or I'd be like, damn, like, I would do some shit like that. Like,
I gotta give you her book.
Yeah, like, as a Black person, it's so exciting and it's so refreshing to have shows like that are so funny, that still have semi-relatable problems, that still touch things that we go through, even the microaggressions, and still are able to make it funny, still able to make it refreshing, still able to see that, especially like as kids, you know, kids growing up watching this, like, they can be like, oh, like, I can do this, I can be in tech, I can be a Black kid in tech, I can be a Black scientist, I can be a dentist, I can be a lawyer. We don't always need, you know, Black shows like The Wire, or Black shows that, you know, are so deep saturated in crime and in poverty. Like, I understand that a lot of Black people do go through those things, but, you know, it's
that doesn't have to be all day, you know?
Yeah, it's duality. We need both.
Yes.
And with white people, it's usually just that hunky-dory rich white person or middle-class white person, and they, you know, they lost their fucking dog or something, or
or they didn't get the job, or their wife left them. It's just like, shit, we have infidelity too, like you know. Oh man, trauma porn. That was a good way to call that. I didn't know if we could, like, I don't know.
I think we should put it all on the table. Like, you know, we're the Black people speaking, Jude. We might as well. We have our platform to speak, and even if it makes us uncomfortable, we should just say it.
I know, but like porn.
I have a question, actually.
Okay,
Ryan. So I'm still kind of unclear about what the difference is between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. I understand that All Lives Matter has a negative connotation, but I'm not quite sure what that negative connotation means.
Alden has something.
Okay, Alden.
So saying All Lives Matter towards Black Lives Matter is like a guy got hit by a car and his leg is bleeding. And another guy goes up to him and be like, is your leg okay? And the person right next to him asks, why don't you ask me if my legs are okay? That's the exact same thing. Like, if you say All Lives Matter towards Black Lives Matter, that's like saying that, because unfortunately Black lives are in danger, but the rest of the lives, we're chilling. Well, not really chilling, but you know what I mean? It's a more crucial time for the Black people. That's why we're chanting Black Lives Matter, not instead of saying All Lives Matter.
And if all lives...
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. It's more like when people say All Lives Matter, it's kind of like a quick rebuttal, like a lazy ass rebuttal, to be like, oh, well, you know, what about white lives? What about Mexican lives? In reality, you know, the people that are arguing this, they don't necessarily care about other people's lives or what other oppressions that people are facing. They just kind of want to devalue Black oppression because they don't really want to accept. They want to ignore what we're going through. They don't want to believe what we're going through as a people, as an ethnic group. So, you know, what Ryan was saying, you know, like, it's just something that makes a lot of other people of color or white people just uncomfortable, and they don't really want to face what's happening to Black people. They'd rather just ignore and kind of just throw not necessarily an imaginary problem, but a problem they don't really care about. Like, you know, they could say All Lives Matter, but nobody that's chanting all lives matter is really talking about these kids in cages. They're not talking about the Muslim camps in China right now. They're not talking about, you know, people in Sudan that are being killed, the
And
different
slaves
types of, yeah, and they're
in
not,
Libya.
right, they're not
Really?
talking about these different genocides and, you know, these different groups of people, marginalized people that are getting killed, that are getting assaulted, that's names are just getting completely swept under the rug. They just they just don't want to believe that our lives really matter.
And they don't want to stand behind it. Like they don't want to, they want to say all lives matter, but it's just like, who? Okay, if you have this all lives matter energy, then spread it around. You know, it's not just like all lives matter, end of conversation, close the door, but it's like all lives matter. So let's talk about abortion. Let's talk about the women, like women's rights to their bodies. Let's talk about these kids in cages. It's none of that. It's just like a all lives matter, the end. And
It's like all lives matter. There's no real problems. This has nothing to do with me. Bye. You know, it's like it's ridiculous.
It's really hypocritical. And then also adding on to what you said before, well, Black Lives Matter is a movement it's more of a movement to highlight the fact that Black lives are not treated the same way as all lives. Like all lives cannot be equal until Black lives are equal. And sure, all lives do matter, but you can't have that until Black people have reached the same equality that other races have, especially specifically whites.
Yeah,
I wanted to add on. Oh, you can go. Sorry.
no,
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, so I wanted to add on to that. So the Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter movements, if you'll call them that, they were made to directly undermine the Black Lives Matter thing. So when they say All Lives Matter, it's not because they truly believe it. It's because, as Jude said, they wanted to just like cover up and just suppress people speaking up against their oppression. So then if you look into the people who support these rebuttal movements, if you'll call them that, it's mostly conservatives. So then more specifically, the fundamentalist conservatives. So then you also have Trump, who's a conservative, and he's the main one. He's one of the most influential people right now. He's not speaking up against this oppression. So if you have one of the most influential people and he's gaining racist followers who just want to suppress people speaking up against oppression, it's going to continually perpetuate this idea that in America, everyone's equal under law, but they're not equal under law enforcement. And that's the issue here. Because while people, well, yes, we are going to say every life matters because they do. It's not that Black lives matter more. What we're trying to say is that Black lives matter as well. So if you have a race, just a group of people of all ethnicities, colors, religions, backgrounds, but you have one subset, which would be Black people, who are being subjected to brutal police treatment and are mass incarcerated, you can't say all lives matter as a true statement. That's the issue with those counter arguments.
Yeah, it's a loaded, empty statement. It doesn't really mean anything coming out of the mouth of somebody that's saying all lives matter.
That was really well worded.
I'm literally writing that down.
And then he also mentioned something about the Blue Lives Matter, which kind of brings up the question of like the all cops are bad movement. I'm gonna let Eunice take that from here. Eunice?
No, you can go ahead. It's
okay. So like I just wanted to clarify, like, what is the ACAB? Like what are the ideas? And like isn't it a bad idea to generalize all cops, or at least that's what people say to it? Like, isn't it a bad idea to generalize that all cops are bad and that some cops are actually good and you're just making them look bad?
Oh, may I?
Go for it.
So ACAB is all cops are bastards. Also 1312. So like one is A and then C3 and then A1 and then B2. So 1312 if you see that. And like we were mentioning before, when all the other people came in, I was really excited to share this with everybody because it means a whole lot. There are definitely good people who decide they want to be a cop. And I think that, like, you know, if they don't know about it, they don't know about it. But I'm here to tell you all right now that the police force is inherently racist. It is impossible to be a good cop because copness is bad. Like, the person can put on the uniform and it's just like, okay, I'm a person, I put on the cop uniform, I'm bad. I want to remind you all that the police force was actually started as a slave patrol. So there we go. In the movie 13th on Netflix, which I really hope that all of you watch, it talks a lot about like how full prisons were as soon as slavery was abolished. And also that in the 13th Amendment, it mentions that slavery is outlawed except for in the case of like criminal action.
Criminal, yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
it's just like, okay, yeah, slavery as we know it is different, but the like institutionalization is new slavery. Can you believe that people are getting paid $2 on the hour to do the same thing that we do here? It's not just about being a prisoner, but who is making up these prisons? The homeless woman who wanted to have her child go to a good school, so she used a different address. Does she deserve that? Was it the hundreds of people in jail for marijuana that is now an essential service? So it's just like there are people in prison who are away from their families, further enforcing another stereotype about Black people, while there's a half Apple store, half dispensary down the street. Is that not something that we can talk about? So it's like if you're participating in something like that, regardless of your intentions, you are making a bad thing worse. Another thing that's really important to notice is how difficult it is for quote unquote good cops to be able to like, I guess to hold accountable other police officers who are the bad police officers. Something that Asia and some other people and I were talking about was that if you were to report a police officer, that they can see who reported them, like days before anything happens. Is that not crazy? And it's like,
it's discouraging.
It's super discouraging. And people, and there's quotas that people have to there's quotas that people have to fill. So one time I got pulled over for a traffic stop. Scared me so bad, but that's not the stuff. So I got pulled over, and the cop told me, he said, I know you have a perfect record. I don't want to do this, but I do have a quota. Do you know what a huge slap in the face that was to me, an educated Black person, to know what that means for other people who really probably don't know what that means? There are people, if I were to not fight that, I would have had like a warrant if I didn't pay for that. Do you know how many people can't afford a $500 ticket that have warrants on them that can be arrested at any time into a privatized prison? And it's just like, okay, sure, if there are good people that want to be cops, they need to understand that it's still the wrong thing. And I want to bring back the Nuremberg trials after World War II, where Nazis were just following orders. They were just obeying the law. They were just doing what they were told. But they were still killing folks for no goddamn reason. And that is a bad thing. Nazis are bad. Cops are bad. And if you're still gassing people, if you're still killing people for what they look like, what religion they practice, what makes you any better? So like sometimes you save a cat from a tree and automatically all of that stuff gets undone. You put on the uniform, you're a bastard. Like, and that is where I stand on that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also want to go back to Alden's statement about the implicit racism thing. If you notice, like most Asians kind of have like a white first name. Like David's a hella white name, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to be a bit honest there. Like David's a pretty white name. And then most other Asians usually have something that's almost kind of white to like kind of fit in, I guess, or like work into that way. But we still have it pretty easy, and we're lucky for that. And then also like continuing your point about like the cops, like they should be doing a lot more. Like even if they are good cops, I feel like that's where the whole movement comes from, where like all cops are bastards, because the good ones aren't telling like those other bad cops and keeping them in check, and that's still their responsibility to check each other, not just check the citizens.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with the fact that you're saying like, oh, like the police officers who aren't speaking out are still doing wrong. And there's this thing it's called mini me syndrome, basically where recruiters and people, it's a social phenomenon where recruiters and executives, they do this recruitment process where they tend to actually recruit people who are similar to them in gender, race, age, experience, style, industry, like those factors are what make them a better applicant, and it's not right because it's just basing it off prejudice. And I feel like that's like, oh, that's rooted from the beginning of the police system. Basically, when the recruiters are recruiting people, they tend to pick the white male, the person who is similar to their thoughts and ideas, the person who believes exactly what they believe, the religion they believe, everything that their convictions are basically their reflection of how good they're going to be at this job. And that's how the recruitment process has been for like a really long time, in cycle, like almost every industry has that. And it's really hard for certain people to get out of that mentality, especially the recruiters, because everyone is biased in some way, shape, or form. There is always bias somewhere, and it's really hard to differentiate, like to take away the face of the person and really see the qualifications of the person.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to what you were saying before about learned behaviors. Like that's as old as your great grand. What's it called? Oh man, it was gonna be clever. I don't know, but like their recruitment person, you know, and it's just like the person who recruited them. It's cyclical that way, and that's how we perpetuate white supremacy in the police force.
And can we also talk about the sexual assault that happens as well within law enforcement, and how dangerous it is too? Again, what Jude was saying, I'm going to reiterate how we cannot even complain. We can't even report it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that needs to be talked about, because again, like I think it was Nikki that was talking about the recruitment process. Like there's an obvious, cycle in which a lot of these people that have been recruited, it is on their public record. It is on their record about, the violence, sexual assault that they've done in the past, and they're still recruited.
And they keep their job.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then the fact that, it takes longer to become a beautician, to become a cosmetologist than it is to be a police officer. And how you don't even need a degree. You don't even need a high school diploma.
Nope. How crazy is it that they can just like go out and giving people guns all willy-nilly, and like someone who cuts hair has to be held more accountable, and they don't get away with murder either. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. Where's my little clap?
Okay, Jude, I have something to say. Okay. So, hi, you guys. Jude and I just came to visit you guys. You guys are doing amazing. I love what you guys are doing. His open conversation is lovely.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you for spreading the word. So, I just wanted to jump in on what Jude was saying about how people recruit like their family. So basically, like, the best thing you could do, I feel like, the smallest thing and the best thing you can do is educate like your family. This is generational racism. Like when I meet somebody, I have to think about, is their parents racist? Not only if they're just acting like, they're an ally, but are their parents racist? Because liberation for Black people is liberation for everybody, no matter how good other like people of color may think they may be treated, like there's still racism towards people of color,
Mm-hmm.
And we can't, I've met so many people like growing up in a Mexican city. It was crazy to me just thinking like how I thought that people that kind of look like me, brown people, they can still be racist. And then even from me just moving from Los Angeles all the way to Michigan, we have the biggest amount of Middle Eastern people here. When I was in small Los Angeles, I'm thinking, well, Middle Eastern people have to totally understand where I'm coming from, because look at all these crazy things that people say about them, but there's still racism within people of color. So it's crazy when you have to separate that, even that, like Black people and people of color. It's and when like I said, liberation for us is liberation for everyone. If Black people are not getting pulled over and beaten for no reason, you might one day look a little tanner,
Yes.
There you go, and that's just one thing I wanted to touch on too.
And the model minority stereotype, like we are all targets. It's just like, whose target do you want to point out first? And so and especially like, okay, so on my mother's side, I'm Indian. My great grandfather came from Calcutta, and so it's like this whole thing is just my mom and her sisters were the first of all of them to have babies with Black men, and just what a huge deal that was for my grandmother to have to like rewrite her understanding of things, because everyone's just on a race to get out of the bottom. And so I think that in that situation, it's just like, obviously we've all got targets on our back. We really had a ban on Muslim countries. It's so crazy. It feels like a movie, just all the kinds of crazy things that are happening, but no one wants to be at the bottom. And apparently that's where we live.
We have to be at the bottom, when it's just like you're always one stroke from being at the bottom too, it's crazy.
And to prove to who? It's not to prove to each other, it's to prove to our white supremacist society.
Be closer to whiteness when there's culture, we can be closer to culture. And it's crazy how Black culture is so loved, but we are not loved. The Grammys, these music awards, everything, they're all they make money. They use us, they use the likeness of us, and we're just not cool too. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like respectability politics, and it's such a double standard, because I feel like, again, like Kiara, like about the Grammys, like I know so many people in the music industry right now that can't even really express themselves musically because they have to meet a certain market. They have to talk about hood shit. They have to talk about, smoking weed and shit.
We're in a reality. People that make urban and not urban music, right? Black music. Let's be honest. Black is urban's another word for Black that they use to keep us in a box. Like The Weeknd, he made a beautiful pop album, and he's stuck in a urban box, and it's crazy how they want to box us up and maintain that they love our talents and use them, but we can't be at the forefront of that.
Yeah, or that, like, again, like the double standard, like they love the hood shit, but they don't respect, or they don't really value people that are really from the hood. They don't want to actually help these people that want to get out of the hood, these people that are, stuck in poverty. They want Black people to have a good, model image. They want us to be, the good Black people, but not necessarily even value the lives of the people that don't have the same opportunities. And it's not fair. It's shameful, and it even, again, it divides Black people as a whole.
They divide us with like my grandfather came from the war and came back to racism. Like it's really, you can do anything. You can be the good kind of Black person. You can be educated. You can do all of that, but you're still gonna get pulled over while you're calling your mom, just like Jude did.
Or get shot.
Or get shot for plenty of things because they couldn't find a taser, because
they didn't know how to use the taser.
Right. The list can go on and on, but the most thing that, if you're an ally, the most thing that you can do is speak up every time. Every time is a good time to speak up.
Don't get tired, because we don't get tired. We have to speak up for ourselves every day. We have to live as a Black person every day. We cannot get out of this skin.
I would love to get tired. I would love a chance to take a nap from
I feel like there's a lot of things that we could educate people on, but there's this one thing I saw a post on Instagram, I think, and like I know that the N word is like a racial slur and like people shouldn't say it, but I think that a lot of people don't understand like the reason behind why and like how do we
Like,
like
what is the reason?
yeah.
Well,
I will let
first of all, I think you guys should just listen to Black people, period. If a
Yeah.
Black person tells you not to say that word, even if you have a Black friend that doesn't care if you say it, listen to that Black person.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that we were able to keep for ourselves. For somebody that, you know, for Black people to be called nigger for 400 years, and the fact that, you know, nigger it's in other languages. The fact that you can call somebody a nigger in every language there is, and it's not out of respect, it's not out of endearment, it's completely to shun us, to think of us as untouchables, think of us ghetto, as unrespectable. You know, it's a violent word. So it was something that we basically claimed for ourselves, or something as endearment, to just call another Black person. And you guys, like, no other person of color and no white person can take that word. It's not for them, period.
I would like to say that although I am a big supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, I disapprove of the radical liberalism like ideas. For example, I don't think affirmative action is justified. And I don't know if you guys seen the news recently or not, but the California legislation is trying to pass this legislation called ACA 5, and basically it would repeal a Proposition 209, which guaranteed all people regardless of color would receive the same amount of opportunities and the same treatments equally. But now, what they're trying, what radical liberalism supporters are trying to do is they're trying to repeal this proposition and kind of give minorities a advantage over everyone else. So I think this idea goes against Martin Luther King's famous quote, which is not just people based on the basis of their color, the skin color, but the content of their character. So although this will provide advantage to minorities, I feel like this still goes against the model, the founding idea of the community.
Well, let me ask you something. So, do you necessarily really think that? Well, let me ask you this. Do you really think that before any of this, Black people are not, like, people of color even have any advantage to get to the same place as white people at the same time, using the same efforts? Do you think we have the same amount of time to actually, go after these same goals as white people? Or do we have to work 10 times hard to just get to second place?
Can I answer that?
I absolutely get that. But I'm just saying that maybe it is better if there's a complete because racism still exists today. This is why Black people have to work harder than everyone to get to the same place as like a white person. But I just wish that the system could be completely equal. I understand that it will take time, but it shouldn't have it shouldn't have to use something like affirmative action, where it could be unfair to other people as well.
I don't necessarily think that it would give an unfair advantage. I think we would just be at the same starting place as a white person. I think that's what gives the notion that our advantage would be unfair, when in reality, a lot of people, even a lot of non-Black people, are okay with Black people working 10 times as hard to get where they are. They don't mind us, you know, working so much harder than they are, as long as we can get there. But I think it's okay for Black people, for trans people, for non-Black to have that same starting place and do whatever they want with the opportunity. I don't think it's an unfair advantage.
Adding on to what Aisha said, it's harder for a lot of people that are Black trying to get to the same position as another race in a certain like business position. Like, for example, a Black woman would have to work 10 times as hard as, let's say, a white man would, just to get the same or maybe even less recognition for the same job, same effort, same result.
And
I think
less pay.
Yeah, and I think yeah, definitely. And I think affirmative action, although I understand what you're saying, the fact that we need affirmative action does reflect badly on the governmental system, but we also need it because the very definition of minority itself is that these people are at a disadvantage.
Yep.
And they need something like affirmative action to help them.
I would also like to say, oh, sorry.
So the thing with affirmative action is that it would be more of an equalizer. So if we look back to like Jim Crow laws, by the time they got rid of these laws and repealed them, Black people were already marginalized into the into more impoverished areas, and were given worse educations, less pay. So how would they be able, without any assistance, to get the same opportunities as a white person who has been living in middle class America, good education, their parents have good pay? So with affirmative action, it gave them the same starting point. So while Black people at that time, because of Jim Crow laws, were already in a bad position, affirmative action helped them have the almost like pretty much the same opportunities as a white person who was growing up in a pretty good financial state.
I feel like mainly when we talk about affirmative action, there's a lot of controversy whether or not it's a failed policy. But I guess in my humble opinion, when you look at neighborhoods and like especially inner city neighborhoods and communities where people of color reside, there's an obvious sort of disturbing disparity between them and white middle class neighborhoods. Economically, it's kind of an issue. And I feel like I actually support defunding the police if you're going to, put some additional funds into investing in these communities, into schools and education. Because I guess, I don't know, my humble opinion is that if we're going to look at the education system and especially applications, I would kind of remove the race, like the part where you put your race, completely out of the picture. And
Yes.
I would base it on like economic or like a wealth status and income of the families instead, rather than basing it on race. It's kind of like it's not needed, I guess, especially if there's going to be so much controversy over whether or not it's inherently a failed policy or not.
Also, you have to consider, like, how are people going to even get to a place where they can be rejected? Like, if you have two people who are equally qualified for the same position, would you choose someone who would have the same experience and same input into whatever organization that you're part of that's completely the same amount of the same amount of ability as the other person? Like, if you have a Black woman who went to the same amount of schooling, like has the same degrees and the same experiences, the fact that we have to have a system like this that would say, you know what, maybe you should probably stop picking the same like Richard, like stop picking the same Sam, and pick a woman, like, to provide that kind of experience. I don't think that that's wildly unfair, but the fact that we need something like affirmative action is unfair. I don't think that anyone should be getting a position that they're not qualified for. But you do have to understand, like Ryan and Asia and Kiara were saying, and Pri, that there is a lack of opportunity and accessibility to certain education and certain opportunities that would provide people the opportunities to get into a position where they would need affirmative action. So it's like, if there is such an issue, if it's so controversial to have affirmative action, then let's level the playing field. Let's give every child the same opportunity to educate themselves, the same opportunity for hope that they could get in that kind of position. So they wouldn't need a leg up because they would start from the same place. And So I understand what people are saying, like that people would just be like a diversity hire, but no, they're a hire because they're qualified and they offer something that someone else can't have. A lot of people that I know and have seen have a great big issue that Mexican people would be taking their job. But I want to I have to remind them all the time, just like, you're just taking my job and making everybody speak Spanish. But if there's a person that can speak 2 languages and do everything else the same way that you can, don't you think that the person who speaks 2 languages deserves it more? That they have an experience that reaches a broader audience? And so it's just like, okay, if you are so upset that someone else would have the same opportunity that you would have just been handed to for no reason, probably get a little bit more qualified. Like, have something more than just where you come from. Have something more, but also give other people the opportunities that you have, so that you know that it's something that was earned and not just handed over to, not that something you were born into. So when we get rid of that, then we'll.
A level playing can be scary to some people,
Yeah, because they wouldn't have a leg to stand
A
up
lot of
on.
change.
Okay, so we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm just going to ask one last question to close it all out, and then we'll have announcements. So like I mentioned before the official Zoom call started, I see people with less and less protests. Like I saw last week, there were a lot more people at the city council protest versus this week, I just drove past it. There were only a few people, and I feel like part of the blame is to social media, since it was trending and people just wanted to be part of the movement or just wanted to have photo shoots. Like, how do you even combat that?
Adding pressure to these people and taking these people accountable, making these people accountable. You can't call yourself an ally and then stop. You have to keep going. Yeah, you have to keep going, and I think it's something that Black people also need to hold themselves accountable for it as well. I like, even though these protests are still going on, even though it's lesser in some places and more in other places, or more consistent in other places, we need to do better as a community, as a people, and then as well just people of color and white allies as well. Like, we have to do more within these protests. We need to do more boycotting. If you can't protest anymore, boycott. Stop supporting a lot of these organizations, a lot of these companies. Again, like Jude has reiterated like 3 or 4 times, watch the 13th, look up ALEC. It's the American Legislative Exchange Council, and they are a privately owned organization. They are donated to, and they are also a political lobbying organization. They're the ones that basically, give all this money or own a lot of these private prisons. They are donating to Trump's campaign, as well as a lot of other conservative officials that don't give a fuck about people of color or about Black people. And there are a lot of lists. Look it up. Stop eating at Wendy's. Stop eating at In-N-Out. Even if they're just franchises, please know that just because people label as a franchise doesn't mean that it's just a 1 to 3 chain franchise place. It's places that basically give about 25,000 to 50,000 to 100,000 people jobs. Meaning these are thousands of stores, thousands of restaurants that are, donating or are privately owning these prisons that are part of the system, that are part of police brutality, that are part of, criminalized Black people and brown. And that's something that we all need to take into consideration. We all need to do the work and do our research and boycott. We don't need to give these people our money.
No, because there's a ton of places to be giving your money to.
Right.
That don't want you to die.
Right. And that's where it starts. It starts from doing your own homework. You don't wait for other people to tell you. If you're really about this shit, do it yourself and tell others.
Research the Tulsa massacre, research Juneteenth, research all these Breonna Taylor, research all these people that are dying in the media, and stand up for your ally, for friends. If you're an ally, even if your Black friends, guys, they don't care. It's hard. It's hard. There's other people that do care. So
and if you don't have no Black friends, stand up for Black people anyways. Make some Black friends and listen.
Black liberation is everybody's liberation. Period. It is.
listen to Black people. I feel like I have to, I feel like growing up, I would have to always like kind of chastise non-Black people about their microaggressions, and they would not listen to me. And it's something that made me grow really tired, and it was something that kind of shut me up from talking about things that bothered me as a Black person. And it's not fair.
And remember how much weight it holds for non-Black people to say that that's ugly. Like, just to make it less regular and to make yourself known as a person that's not into shit like that, because eventually the more people that they're introduced to that are not into shit like that, the less they're going to do it. And they're going to have to assume like there was, I don't know. And of course racism has always been a thing. There's never not been police brutality. But at one point, people were a lot more ashamed of their racism than they are today. And I would love to bring that back times a billion. I would love to make people embarrassed of their racism, embarrassed of their microaggressions. I would like people to be so petrified of the rejection they would receive after treating people and having these kinds of like jokes. But as Priya was saying, I know that we're running out of time, but there's a billion different movies to watch, a billion different books and essays and petitions to sign and little easy things that I know that high schoolers often aren't able to do. And this is an accessible movement for everybody. My partner has lupus, so I haven't been able to protest like I want to because we're also in a pandemic. But there are a billion petitions that need to be signed, a billion letters that need to be written, a billion emails that need to be sent out, a billion representatives to call, and books to read, ways to inform yourself, different ways to answer the questions that people are asking you about what are you doing. And to answer yourself, like, what can I do? There's an answer. There's an answer. And I will send somebody the books that I have listed and the websites that I have listed.
Yeah.
Amy, and thank you.